Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a morning this morning on SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast, an unusual time for us to do interviews, but we have a special feature coming up. We have Julia Becker Collins, who is the Chief Operating Officer and owner of Vision Advertising here in Central Massachusetts. Julia, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you today.
We were having a great conversation earlier, and I want to delve into, you were published in the Worcester Business Journal earlier this year, and you were talking about as we were beginning to look back at the process of running a small business during the pandemic and experiencing the kinds of assistance that were out in the options for small business. And much of what you said really resonated with us here, not just at the podcast, but at SM Graves Associates in general, because like you, I'm a small business owner. And I had two businesses and came out of COVID with one business. And so not that that's altogether bad, but a lot of what you said resonated. So why don't you explain for our listeners a little bit about the premise of that article first off?
Sure. So I wrote an opinion piece for the Worcester Business Journal that basically said that, the term, quote, small business is being thrown around in the media and in politics, and it kind of always has, but especially in 2020, in the beginning of 2021 around COVID, because it's being used around funding and the PPP and kind of, let's save our small businesses. And the everyday person thinks of a small business, again, air quotes around that, as, the mom and pop shop hardware store or your favorite pizzeria or, a brewery or, a small business like a web design agency, something small, something that's literally small, 25 people or under, very small. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's in somebody's basement, maybe it has a storefront, but it's a small business. When, what we learned in 2020 and 2021, and I think that some of us in business already knew this, but really it became apparent, is that what we thought of as small business, day-to-day people on the street, and what was being coined small business by politicians, and those creating revenue streams to save, quote, small business, really wasn't the same thing, because small business, relief was being created for businesses with hundreds of employees and millions of dollars of revenue. And that's just not aligned. And I'm not saying that those businesses are bad or evil or there's anything wrong with them. It's just a different kind of business. Right. And so, I think the title of my piece was, small business relief needs to actually help small businesses.
Yes, it was a very to the point title. I mean, it's
right. Because it's, what ended up happening for, those that don't know is that a lot of the small business relief didn't help the small businesses because things like the PPP loans got caught up in a, red tape bureaucratic system for a million reasons I could theorize, or we could have a long conversation about it, because, bigger businesses that had larger loans that are possible through the PPP got to the front of the line. And, somebody like a giant restaurant chain where each individual location was seen as a small business versus the whole company, they're going to get their PPP loan before the 5-person hardware store.
Right. Which in the case of an emergency that's hitting all of us in the same way at the same time, there's a disconnect there. It doesn't matter that you're helping a business that has more employees if you're hurting me and I'm a sole proprietor. If I go out of business, that is completely catastrophic for me.
Correct.
It doesn't matter how many people there are there.
Right. And I'm sure like you, I spent 2020 scrambling to find as much funding as possible to keep my small business under 10 people alive, because even though we were thriving beforehand, and thank goodness we're doing very well now, everybody had economic repercussions over the pandemic. Whether it was good or bad, everybody felt it. It was a change in your economy for your company. And we struggled with the PPP because of a number of problems. And it felt like every time we turned on the news or every time you did research about something, there's all these, quote, small business initiatives to help, quote, Main Street. And as somebody that runs a small business on, quote, Main Street,
Yeah,
that relief isn't there.
there's a lot of talk now because we are starting to look back at the year that was.
Mm-hmm.
To say that, and I agree with this. I happen to agree with it, that the pandemic simply exacerbated problems within the system of various kinds, economic development, of social problems, et cetera, that already existed. It just exacerbated them, but it also brought them to light at a time period where millions and millions of people around the world had time to sit down and actually have to face the fact that this is what has been happening, right?
Yep.
And a broader stretch of people in this case have the frustration of being outside of the circle, right? Where you thought you were in that circle, but when the chips were down, you really weren't a part of that circle. What are the repercussions, though, right? Talk a little bit about the repercussions to cities and towns, to communities, right? Because of the way this all happened. And
right.
what does that mean? What does it mean for the people there?
I mean, I've been saying since the beginning of this that we haven't seen the far-reaching economic repercussions of the pandemic. One of the most visible economic repercussions of the pandemic has been restaurants. And as a company that works with restaurants, we've seen it up close and personal. We have seen the devastating effects of the pandemic on restaurants. The restaurants that have stayed open, the restaurants that have had to close, the restaurants that closed for the pandemic and then reopened. I have seen every aspect of this, working intimately with restaurant owners. I've seen it. And now on the other side of it, if you stayed open and you've, quote, survived this far, you're having a staffing shortage, right? So there's so many layers to the restaurant problem. But the restaurant problem isn't the only problem, because even if it's just, quote, just the restaurant problem, you have so many businesses that rely on restaurants, that work with restaurants, that is a vendor to a restaurant. The restaurant pays people, the restaurant, services other businesses. That it's, think about one business, they use other businesses and those businesses service that business. It's a whole ecosystem, right? So if restaurants are struggling, that means an ecosystem of businesses are struggling. Yeah. Beyond that, there is so many more economic repercussions. And I was saying this to you before we started, an example in Massachusetts being that one of my favorite small businesses, Bantam Cider, just announced that they're closing. They're based in Somerville. They're a woman-owned hard cider company. They've been around, I believe, for 10 years. If you go to their Instagram page, they have a very long, very well-written explanation as to why they're closing and the decision that they had to make. And it really has to do with the fact that, I'm simplifying here, but there's supply chain issues. Now we've come to, quote, the other side of the pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed. And they are facing such extreme supply chain issues getting the ingredients for what they make. And one of their core values is very high quality ingredients. They refuse to compromise on those. And they don't want to increase the pricing on what they sell by so much that they've found themselves in a catch-22. And so rather than exorbitantly increase their pricing for the consumer or compromise their ingredients, they've decided to close shop after 10 years, after surviving the pandemic.
Yeah, and a business that was around for 10 years. And so they've made it over the hump, so to speak. This isn't a question of,
I think 2 recessions. And and they had an ecosystem around them. I know that because I'm on their running team, and they supported local road races. They supported nonprofits. They supported, they had a tap room that people came into, and they did events there. This is in Somerville. It's a big space. So, to have that close is a very big deal.
I'm glad you used the term ecosystem too, because one of the things I'm interested your take on this, not just the lopsided nature of who and how much assistance, but we noticed we're in the business of designing and implementing economic development programming.
Yep.
Most of the assistance that was out there really wasn't assistance. It was regranting of funds. And even prior to the pandemic, there isn't a lot of long-term mentorship that's available for small business, which often is what they need. It's not that they need more money alone, or maybe at all. It's that somebody who's already done it, that can help them navigate certain parts of the time frame over the life cycle of the beginning of a business in particular, so that they can make it past the hump, right? Make it past the tenuous turnaround in the beginning. There was none of that going on. And
right.
so you're regranting money to people so they can make it through another month or two, but the problems still persist.
Right. And I think, this is for vision advertising, we came in a very unique position because I have a nonprofit background. So when you're talking about grants, like, I know to search for grants. I know how to write grants. But I'm in a corporate environment right now. So when we were searching for funds, I have a set of skills that most people in corporate don't have.
Yeah.
I know to look for, I think it's MGCC was giving out small business grants.
Correct.
But most people in corporate don't know to look for that. Whereas most people in nonprofit know, like, there was just a crossover of skills that most small businesses just don't have. And unless you were in an incubator, unless you were in an entrepreneurship leadership program, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know, or you have a mentor, etc.
Yeah.
And I know there are programs, I work, I have some people I mentor, etc. But unless you're actively seeking that, it's really hard. Also, when you're kind of at a certain point in your career, you don't think like, oh, I need a mentor, I need help, etc. So unless you have somebody on your staff that has a complementary set of skills, like my CEO has a complementary set of skills to what I have, so she can deal with the PPP in ways that I can't, and then I can deal with the MGCC and she can't. Most companies can't do that.
That's right.
So it's just, you're not going to get the funding, because when we got the MGCC grant, most people were like, I don't even know what that is. Never even heard of that. I didn't know corporations could get grants. I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I found that if you had already embedded relationships with your municipal and state representation, as an example, right? If you had an active relationship or two there, it increased the likelihood you'd know. If you were, just as you said, if you were part of an economic development agency such as ours, or the incubator we were running in North Central Mass, you would know, right? But if you weren't tapped into those networks already, or came from a background where you would know to even look for those things in the first place,
right,
you weren't able to find, and you might know about the payroll protection program, but then I even found companies that were, in my opinion, they were being given bad advice about what to do with PPP, because in some cases, some of these companies really, when you took a look at them, you said, what you need to do is use this as an opportunity to liquidate. And then let's help you start a new business. Or if you're done entrepreneurship, let's help you transition back into the workforce.
I would say that.
You know what I mean?
Yep. With the first round of the PPP, it was very confusing for everyone. Just really very confusing. And it was like a hurry up and get your stuff in. You don't know what you're doing, but there's money potentially available. And it felt like being on a hamster wheel. Like there was not enough time to get all your paperwork in.
Right. And
by the time you got all your paperwork in and they're like, we have everything, the money was gone. But and then I felt like I was watching congressional, committee meetings, trying to see if like my small business was going to get more money from people in Washington, DC. It was crazy.
Right.
But I don't think anybody understood what to do the first round, because real small businesses don't have advisors explaining what these big laws mean. You know, I feel like I'm a very smart person and I know what I'm doing. And I have great people I can ask questions to. I have people in my network that understand things. And if I don't understand things, I can raise my hand and say, hey, does anybody understand this? And I worked so hard for the first round of the PPP and talked to everybody I know. And I have no problem saying, like, I don't get this. Can somebody help me? And I know we did better with that than most people, but still, it was so hard. It should not have been that hard. And the way that it was promoted was that it's just, you know, fill out a form and here's your money for free, which is just not the case at all.
Right.
And then in terms of like the advice that was given out, I think the smaller the business was, the more confusing it was.
Yeah.
Should I do this? Is it going to be forgiven? I can't take a loan. Even if it was like you were going to get $1,000, you know, which if you're a very small business, you could have gotten just 1,500, 1,000, whatever. But it was very unclear if that was worth it.
You know, it's
through it.
And what you're pointing at gets to this broader issue of one thing I think that the pandemic period sort of highlighted was there are elements within various industries where decentralization would help improve things. There are other cases where centralization and standardization would help. You're describing one of those cases, right? Where, you know, and the reality is if we already had, in some cases, brought back that which existed in the past, robust economic development assistance,
right,
to truly help small business flourish, that already would have been in place. And the people to do that work already would have been in place. And so what we were really experiencing is what happens when you destabilize those public amenities, right?
Right. I mean, it definitely felt like they were saying, go talk to the SBA, and we go talk to the SBA and they go, we don't know.
Right.
So,
And it's not because they're not bad
no,
people. They like, nobody told us.
Right. Correct. But that's what all the communication for the first round felt like. And then because nobody knew what was going to happen with the pandemic, which, you know, that is what it is. It was like, okay, well, this will last us if you got the PPP. But then it obviously didn't last anybody. So then what are you supposed to do when it runs up? It felt like we were all walking a tightrope. And now we've kind of almost hit the end of the tightrope, but we don't really know where the platform is.
In your view, how do we build back better?
That's a great question. How do we build back better?
I don't think it happens unless people like you and I and our neighbors actually think about it, have some opinions on it, right. And then we got to fight for those things, right? I mean, I think
one of the things that needs to happen is, there still is very poor communication about PPP forgiveness. A lot of people have no idea. A lot of business owners, especially the very small business owners, if you're just one person, two people, a lot of people have no idea if their PPP is being forgiven. People are being audited for $500. It's crazy. I've heard all kinds of stories. So I think you have to start there. You need to start with like the bureaucracy and red tape around the very small businesses is just like, we need to get past this. Like, we're not like, why are you auditing somebody for $500 when giant restaurant chains got 50K or whatever it is, like millions? I have no idea how much they got. It's just like that part, better communication around forgiveness. Let's move past the first round of it, get to the second round of forgiveness or not forgiveness. I think there needs to be a lot of clarity and better communication around like, here's how to do the forgiveness. Yes, you were forgiven. No, you're not forgiven. Like, let's go.
Right.
With that, come on.
Right.
And then once we get past that, I think there need to be additional resources, whether it's the SBA or somebody like, Center for Women in Enterprise or some additional, great groups that offer like webinars, professional development, once we can do in-person events again, maybe some mentorship programs. Like, let's build some skill sets and not have it be charged to the person taking it, but let's infuse some dollars into those nonprofits.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I like the idea. Everything you're saying resonates with me. I want there to be more longer term elements, options. As an example, the Center for Women and Enterprise does an excellent job. The vast majority of the counseling they do, though, is sort of a one and you're done. You walk in, you're there for a few hours, you're done. And that helps in certain cases, but there are other cases where either some long-term peer advisory or long-term one-on-one mentorship, it can be done in various ways, but it's that long-term, more intensive work.
So maybe
they get,
I know that they're grant funded, at least a decent amount of it is grant funded. So maybe they get funding to create this like longer term mentorship program. Like take somebody who's, you know, deep into their career and has skill set A, and somebody that is, you know, starting a business or is earlier in the career, and do some pairing up with them and create some events around that, and then create some professional development around those topics, and kind of like create that like cohort. Maybe it's a leadership development program or whatever it is. And I know there's different leadership development programs across the state. There's like Worcester Leadership, et cetera.
Yep.
Those are shorter term things. You know, if you're talking about something that's longer term, the thing I have seen to be most successful is these mentorship relationships, because then you can just call upon the person, even if it's 10 years from now. Right. Say like, hey, Susie, I don't know what to do about this thing. You know, my accountant says this. What do I do? Can you help me? And if she doesn't know, then she'll refer you to somebody.
Right.
So I think creating those relationships is one of the biggest things, because when you're earlier in your career, you don't know who to ask about anything.
Right. That's right. That's right. The stuff they don't teach you in school.
There's a lot they don't teach you in school.
Right on.
That's one of the big things I say to my interns, is that in our internship programs, we teach you what they don't teach you in school, you know, like office politics and how to email people and how to manage up and what to do if your boss's boss wants something.
I had the distinct pleasure of graduating undergraduate from a music business program, and we had a class. Our final class was called Senior Studio, and it was an all-encompassing foray into all different kinds of things, including introduction to sort of public policy and how state municipal things kind of work, more or less, in case you ever need to know those things. And even down to things like how to shake people's hand and look them in the eye, how to gracefully open a door and not hit yourself. Now, it all sounds funny, but extremely valuable for people that were weeks or months away from going off into the world and pretending to be sophisticated for a while until they actually got some sophistication, you know?
Right. In my undergraduate program, we had this class, I think it was called like Resume and Careers or something. And I don't remember the name of it. And it was basically like, here's how to do a cover letter. Here's how to do a resume. Here's how to balance your checkbook. Here's how to apply for credit. Here's how to like all of these things. Right. Here's how to do an interview. Here's how to write a thank you letter. Here's how to like apply for a job you don't think you're qualified for. Here's how to take these skills and apply it to this job. And here's what to do on the first day of a job, et cetera, et cetera. And it was incredibly valuable. Actually, the woman who ran it was my advisor in college. She just like a month ago retired after 35 years in the job.
Wow.
Spoke at her virtual graduation. Yep. And the overwhelming theme was that class changed my life. Like that class that everyone took changed everyone's lives. And the department head was at the retirement party, and she was like, I had no idea, which says something. But also like, what are we going to do about this class? And I was like, I don't know. That's your problem.
Right.
We should have probably dealt with that.
Yeah, there was a reason why people were attracted to recent graduates of our program year upon year, because we were human beings, you know?
Right.
We were trained to act like we were human beings, and what to do when you're feeling insecure, what to do when you know what I mean? That very human stuff that often is the difference between, you know, launching into something more successful or not, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I found that class invaluable. I mean, one of the things it taught me was to apply for everything. If you're interested in something, apply for it, all of that. And that's been so helpful in my career.
Well, Julia Becker Collins, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm really glad that you were able to carve out a little bit of time for us at the Are We Here Yet podcast in the morning.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can find out more on Julia Becker Collins and her company, Vision Advertising, on our episode page, which is coming up. All episodes of all of our podcasts, including On the Rocks Politica, The Jazz Room, and the Mental Suppository podcast, can be found at smgravesassociates.com/podcast. Excellent. Let me just stop the recording.